Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience, and I'm here tonight with my full review of the Singxer SA-1 headphone amp. And I want to say sorry that it's taken so long. I think it was about 3 months ago that I did my first impressions on this, and I've just had so much work to do. I got to make a living, this is just a hobby, and I've got to put making a living and keeping a roof over my head and food on the table first priority. So anyway, this was loaned to me for review by Apos Audio, and I want to say thank you for them for being so patient with me. Like I said, I've had this about 3 months now. Anyway, this currently sells at $5.99, and that's in US dollars. And this is a fully balanced solid state headphone amp. This amp has two analog inputs, both RCA single-ended and XLR XLR balanced, and it has 5 analog outputs. It has RCA single-ended and XLR balanced preamp outputs, and it has 3 headphone outputs. That would be a 6.3 millimeter single-ended, 4.4 millimeter balanced, and 4-pin XLR, which is balanced also. According to the Apos website, Singxer is claiming a signal-to-noise ratio of 126 decibels, which is exceptional, and a dynamic range of 147 decibels, which I believe is the highest I've heard from any amp. Anyway, the power output of this, and this amp, according to the website, is Class A. I'm not positive if it's 100% pure Class A all the way up to the rated power, but I don't see anything that says it isn't. I don't see anything that says it switches over to Class AB. So if this is entirely Class A, this thing has a huge amount of power, and Class A, just usually has a richer, kind of a warmer sound to it, and that's exactly what I'm hearing from this amp, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, the power rating of this amp is 6,480 milliwatts into 32 ohms. That is from the balanced output. All of these numbers are from the balanced output. So that's almost 6.5 watts per channel into 32 ohms. 2,000 milliwatts or 2 watts per channel into 120 ohms, and 380 milliwatts into 600 ohms. Once again, those numbers are from the balanced output. I cannot find any numbers for the output from the single-ended. It is definitely less than most amps put out half as much power from the single-ended output. And I did want to mention that in my first impressions of this, I pointed out what I thought was sort of a major, well, not a major flaw, but a flaw with this amp. I pointed out, and I now see, I feel like I was kind of overcritical of the amp about this, and it was about the power. The only complaint I had about this amp in my first impressions was that I tested it with a couple of real hard to drive headphones, and it did well with one, which was the Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE. But I said in my first impressions that it fell short of being able to power the Hi-Fi Man HE560 from its single-ended output. I said it did great from the balanced output, but I said it came short from the single-ended output, and I think I had only had it a few days, maybe a week at the time, and I think I made a couple of mistakes and think I came to an unfair judgment about this amp. So I'll talk about that go into that a little bit deeper in a few minutes and explain where I think my mistake was and what I think I did wrong, because I retested it and it actually does a pretty good job. Not One, it doesn't get 100% out of the HE560 from the single-ended output, but it's not as bad as I said it was. It falls just slightly short. So anyway, talk about that in a few minutes. So, getting back to the specs on this amp, the size is 9.2 inches wide, 6.6 inches deep from front to back, and about 1.8 inches tall, and weighs in at 3.9 pounds. It actually feels pretty substantial for its size. You know, it's got some pretty good weight to it, and the enclosure, the chassis of this is all aluminum, so it's not the chassis giving it the weight, it's, you know, the components inside of this. Anyway, I mentioned earlier, this is a Class A amplification. It is solid state. I'll give you a closer look at the amp. I'll try to move in a little bit here. And we'll start with the front here. First, you've got your power on indicator, little LED light here. Then your first switch here is either off preamp. I think preamp's in the middle. Yeah, you've got three positions. You've got off, preamp, and headphone amp. And this is sort of a standby switch because there's actually a power switch on the back of this, and I'm kind of jumping around, but I'll show you that in a minute. So you can leave the power switch on that's on the rear and then turn it off here, and that leaves it in standby. So anyway, your second switch is a switch between your two analog inputs, your RCA and your XLR. And then the third switch is called a high Z and low Z. Low Z is in the lower position, high Z is in the higher position. And what that is for, it depends on the impedance of your headphones. Most headphones, you're probably going to want to use the low Z setting. And at first, like some other reviewers, I didn't think it made a whole lot of difference, but I did realize on some headphones it makes a huge difference. And basically what I found out is pretty much all planar magnetic headphones, you want to leave it on low Z. And especially Hi-Fi Man planar headphones. Hi-Fi Man planar headphones do not sound good with it on high Z. And as you probably know, they're all pretty low impedance, like 40 ohms and lower. The one headphone that I did find that definitely sounded better on high Z was the ZMF Atrium, which is a 300 ohm headphone, and it definitely did sound better on high Z. It had better bass impact and better controlled, tighter bass, so it did make a difference. So pay attention to where that switch is, because that may be part of my problem where I kind of criticized this amp in the my first impressions. I think I might have had it in the wrong spot. So anyway, you've got your three headphone outputs. You've got your 4.4 millimeter balanced, your 6.3 millimeter single-ended, and your 4-pin full-size XLR. And then you've got your volume knob here, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit because something I didn't realize by the time I did my first impressions. Most volume knobs on most amps are what I would call linear. You move it a little bit, it gets a little bit louder, and it's basically even all the way around. You know, you move it to, a little bit, and it stays the same. You had the same increase in loudness basically all the way around the volume knob. Well, this is different, and the only other amp that I've reviewed that had a similar volume knob was a few years ago. I did a review of the Wells Audio Milo, and it had an upgrade volume knob, and it was like this one. It starts out really slow. When from 7 o'clock where it starts, getting all the way up into like 12 o'clock, it's a very gradual increase in the volume. Where when you get further, when you get past 12 o'clock, the volume starts jumping up, the power starts jumping up a lot more quickly. And what I found out is once you get up here like about 3 o'clock, most amps, by the time you get that far, they just kind of run out of power. They can't do anything past that. But this, When you get up here at like 3 o'clock, that's when the power really starts coming in, and just a little bit of an increase gives you a huge amount of power increase. So what's nice about that is if you want to use a real sensitive headphone, or maybe even an IEM, because the volume increase is so gradual at the beginning, you have real good control. It's not touchy. And you don't have the big increase until you get way around here. And the only place you're going to use that is real hard to drive headphones, like say the Hi-Fi Man HE560, where I was up at like 3, 4 o'clock on the volume knob. So that's where my problem came in, where I thought that this wasn't putting out enough power from the single-ended output. I had plugged in the HE560 and I'd run the volume knob up to just normal listening. I was at like 1 o'clock on the volume knob. Okay, by the time it got loud, I was at like, probably 2, almost 3 o'clock, and I thought I was reaching the limits of the amp at that point. And to tell you the truth, the headphones still sounded sort of flat and, just didn't have much impact to the bass, and I thought this amp ran short on power. But what I found out is you can just keep going with this. This thing will go all the way to like 5 o'clock without distorting. And when you get up here past 3, like up to about 4 o'clock, the HE560 actually started hitting pretty hard and had some impact to the bass. And so I don't think, like I said, I criticized this saying that I didn't think it had enough power to power the HE560 from the single-ended output, but it turns out it does. It does a good job. It's not getting 100% out of the HE560, like say the Burson Conductor or the Audio GD Master 9, but it's doing a really good job. It's respectable, and that's the hardest to drive headphone that I've reviewed. Okay, from the balanced output, it is more than enough power for every headphone that I've thrown at it, and even from the single-ended output, it did really well with even, like the Aria Stealth from Hi-Fi Man, the Sundara, the Edition XS, even the HE400 SE, which is very hard to drive. It does an exceptional job from the balanced output and a really good job from the single-ended output. I did want to mention, though, that I think there's a small sound improvement from the balanced output. I think the sound stage is a little bit larger with a little bit more depth to it, and the clarity, I'm not sure. I mean, I think there might be a very small increase of resolution, but the biggest difference is in the sound stage. It's just a little bit bigger and a little bit more three-dimensional. So if you, eventually you're going to want to get a balanced cable for your headphone. It's going to do really well from the single-ended output, but eventually somewhere down the line, especially your best headphone, you're probably going to want to use the balanced output of this. But it doesn't make as much difference as some amps. Some amps, they really fall short from the single-ended output. Before I forget, I did want to mention that there are gain controls on this amp. You have a choice of high or low gain, but the controls are actually on the bottom. It's 4 little switches, and you got to switch all 4 of them at the same time. And to be honest, I've left this in high gain the entire time I've reviewed it. I've never even tried it in low gain, and the reason why is because this amp is dead silent. So there has been no reason to switch down to low gain, because normally that's when you switch down to a lower gain, is if you're picking up hiss, in a sensitive headphone. And I used my most sensitive headphone, the one I used to test the noise floor of amps, which is like a 20-year-old Sony DJ headphone, the MDV 700, I believe. Anyway, super efficient, like 112 or 14 decibels at 1 milliwatt, more efficient than most IEMs. And if an amp has any hiss or any background noise, I will hear it with that headphone. And I plugged that headphone into this only from the single-ended output. I don't have balanced cable for that. But anyway, from the single-ended output, I heard absolutely no hiss in high gain and turned the volume knob all the way to the maximum, all the way to 5 o'clock. Still heard absolutely nothing. And I'll be honest with you, the only other amp I can remember reviewing that I could turn the volume all the way up with that headphone is, and not have hiss, is the Headamp GSX Mini, which is a $2,000 amp. And that's the only other amp I can remember that had absolutely dead silent, no background hiss, even at full volume and high gain. So very impressed with this amp in that respect. So anyway, haven't shown you the back of the amp yet. You have your analog inputs over here, your XLR balanced and your RCA single-ended, and then you have your preamp output, same thing, your RCA single-ended and your XLR balanced. And then right here, this toggle switch is your power. You've got your AC input here, your standard 120 volt, and it does come with a power cord. And anyway, what you can do is switch this on here and it actually lights up. Haven't seen that in a while, but it lights up, lets you know it's on. And then you can just leave it on in standby mode, and then you just switch the power off or to preamp or to headphones with the switch on the front. So anyway, spent longer than I planned on showing you the amp. This is my full review, so I did want to mention what type of music I use. I usually use a combination of different types of rock music. I really like classic rock, some pop, some electronic, some acoustic, a little bit of orchestral music. And then to test this, I used 3 different decks as my input on this. And the primary deck I used was a Topping D70S MQA version. And the reason why is I love that amp. I think that is an outstanding amp for the price. I think it sells for about $650, but I'm not sure if it's still available, but it's almost exactly the same size. You can actually see in the picture back here, the 2 stacked. That's how I was testing it. It's almost the same size and sells for about the same price. This amp is $599. I think that DAC was $650. And the reason I love that DAC, in fact, I like it a lot better than the Topping flagship, the D90. I prefer this one. To me, the D90 sounds kind of dry, kind of analytical, and lacks musicality. Where the D70, to me, sounds almost like an R2R DAC. It has different chips in it. I think they're AKM, and where the D90, I think, uses Sabre chips. Well, anyway, completely different tone balance, much warmer, much richer, but still has like 98% of the detail of the D90 flagship. So anyway, in my opinion, this DAC, the D70S, and this is the MQA version, is a perfect match for this amp. Anyway, but I tried 2 other DACs. I tried the Topping E30, which sells for only, I think, $149, which is another DAC that I really like, but it's a little drier, a little more analytical. Very clean, very detailed, but a little bit, like I said, a little bit colder sound, a little bit drier, and I wanted to see how this DAC did with, or this amp did with that, and see if it still put out a warm sound. And it actually did, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the reason I did that is because if you have spent $600 on this amp and you need a DAC but your budget's tight, I can easily recommend the Topping E30 as a DAC that it's not quite as good as a D70, but it'll get you real close for a lot less money. And then also, in my comparison, one of the amps I compared this to is the Hi-Fi Man EF400, and that has line level outputs from the DAC, so you can use it as a DAC only. And I ran those to this to see how this sounded with the R2R DAC that's built into the Hi-Fi Man EF400 while I was doing the comparison. So I'll talk about that more later too. Anyway, headphones. I used several Hi-Fi Man headphones reviewing this, the HE400SE, the HE560, the Edition XS, the Ananda, and the Aria Stealth. I also used the ZMF Atrium as my test using a high impedance headphone. It's the highest I have at 300 ohms. And then also the Kennerton Thror, which is a flagship open back from Kennerton. And still, in my opinion, one of the very best headphones I've ever heard. So, you know, it's just so detailed and it has an incredible sound stage and depth, and it really gives me an idea how good an amp actually is. Things I can't hear with a lesser headphone, I can hear with that. Anyway, in my comparison, I compared this to the iFi Zencan Singxer stack that I just did a review on, I don't know, about 4 days ago. The Burson Conductor 3 reference, which I still happen to have around. Thank you to Burson for letting me hang on to that for so long. It's been on kind of a long-term loan. I compared it to a full tube amp, the Waveborn Power Amp Plus, which is a transformer coupled tube amp, because this amp has a very nice, warm, rich sound, and I wanted to see how it compared to a tube amp, which, you know, are known for being warm and rich. And also compared it to the Hi-Fi Man EF400, which sells for about the same price, but is a DAC and amp combo all in one. And then just to see how it held up against the, I wanted to see how it held up against my reference system, which is the Audio GD Master 9 and the R8 MK2 DAC, which is about a $4,200 stack. And this combo here works out to about $1,250 for the stack, so you're at about, the Audio GD is about three and a half times the price, and I wanted to see how close this got, because it actually has a similar sound. So anyway, the sound of this amp, I would describe it as warm, rich, smooth, liquid, yet very good detail and resolution. Very clean, very detailed sound. It never sounds dry or analytical. Even if the DAC is sort of dry and analytical, it still adds some warmth to the sound. It's a little bit on the warm side of neutral, but it's not dark sounding and it's not lacking in detail. Very, very clean, very good treble, but just has a nice warm touch to the mid-range, which I really, really like. It has a wide and deep sound stage, and I know that depends a lot on the DAC, but you know, some amps just, even with a DAC with a large soundstage, just can't reproduce that width and depth, and this seems to do a very good job. The power output from the single-ended, or from the balanced output, is outstanding and easily powers any headphone I've thrown at it. The power output from the single-ended is very good, and like I said, you know, even the Hi-Fi Man HE560, which I said in my first video, it fell short. I think the problem is I didn't understand that the volume knob was non-linear, and also I think I might have had the impedance switch on high gain, because the Hi-Fi Man HE560 is actually about 50 ohms, and I wasn't sure whether to leave it on low impedance or high impedance, and it's possible I left it on high impedance when I listened to that headphone, and I found out just last night. I was messing around with it and realized that the Hi-Fi Man HE560 does sound really bad with the switch on high impedance. The bass is lacking, the bass is muddy, and that's pretty much the case with any Hi-Fi Man headphone I use. So any Hi-Fi Man headphone, definitely you want to be on low impedance. So I think that's why I kind of unfairly judge the amp. I think I may have had it on high impedance, and like I said, I wasn't understanding the nonlinear volume control, where on a hard to drive headphone from the single-ended output, I had to be up at like 3 or 4 o'clock on the volume knob before the power really kicked in, and did a good job. So anyway, this amp has done very well with pretty much every headphone I've thrown. Well, every headphone. I've thrown like probably 6-8 headphones at this amp. It's done very well, especially from the balanced output. And so anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a short break, and I'm going to come back, and I told you about the amps I compared this to. I'm going to give you a quick review of how it compared to each of those amps, and try not to run this video too much longer. I'm getting too long in all my videos, so I need to work on shortening them up a little bit. So anyway, thank you for being patient and sticking with me this long. I'll be back in a few minutes with the conclusion of this video. Okay, I'm back from a short break, and before I wrap up this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about how this amp compared to some other amps I compared it to. So one of the first things I compared the Singxer to is a few days ago, about 4 days ago, I finished up my full review of the iFi Zen 1 Signature DAC and iFi ZenCan Signature HFM amp as a stack, and I really liked it and very happy with those. Really liked the sound, and I wanted to compare this to those and see how it held up. And so first, I compared the two using the topping E30 DAC hooked up to the Singxer, which brings the price a little closer. The iFi stack combined comes to about $650. This amp is $600, so with the E30 DAC you're at about $750, about $100 more than the iFi stack. So anyway, using the E30 DAC from topping, they actually sounded very similar. Both a little on the warm side of neutral, both very clean, very detailed, really hard to tell apart. And the biggest difference was, though, that from the single-ended outputs, they both seemed to put out about the same amount of power and handled pretty much everything really well. Both took the HE560 to about 90% of its potential. The biggest difference is the Singxer from the balanced output puts out a lot more power than the iFi stack. Like I said, what is it, 6.5 watts per channel? A lot more power on tap and a little bit more dynamic sound. So with the E30, I would say they were about equal from the single-ended output, but I have to give the edge to the Singxer from the balanced output because of the extra power and, you know, just a little more weight to the sound, a little bit harder hitting bass. I then tried it with the D70 DAC from topping against the iFi stack, which now each component of this stack costs about as much as the entire iFi stack. So not really a fair comparison, but once I use the D70, it warms up this amp even more, and I preferred it, but like I said, you know, now you're at twice the price. So this combination here with the topping D70, I think, you know, it was an easy decision. I would pick it over the iFi stack. Not taken away from the iFi stack, and the iFi stack can be had for $650, which is just a little more than this amp alone. So anyway, then I compared this to the Burson Conductor 3 Reference, which is about a $1,750 combo amp and DAC. It has a DAC built in. So because of the price, I just tried it with the D70. So using the D70 from topping hooked up to the Singxer, comparing it to the Burson, I thought they had a very similar sound, a very similar tone balance. I actually prefer the D70 DAC from topping to the built-in DAC inside of the Burson Conductor 3. And the reason why is it has a little bit larger sound stage with a little bit more three-dimensional sound. Like I said, the D70 sounds very similar to some higher-end R2R DACs that I've reviewed. And I personally think the D70 is the best DAC I've reviewed under $1,000. So anyway, I prefer the DAC a little bit to the Burson DAC, but I'd have to say that the amp in the Conductor 3 reference outdoes the Singxer by a little bit. Not a huge margin, maybe 10 or 20%. It seems to have a little more power, but it just gives a little bit more weight to the music and a little bit more impact. It just feels like a bigger, more powerful amp. Even though the Singxer has plenty of power, I don't think that's it, but it's just, like I said, the music just seems to have a little bit more weight and a little bit more impact to it from the Burson. So I would say, overall, I would give a narrow victory to the Burson Conductor 3 over this combo, the topping D70 and the Singxer SA-1, but you really, by the time you buy this combo, you're getting up there, you're up with like about $1,300, you're, 3/4 of the way to the price of the Burson, and like I said, and it gets you close. I'd say it gets you 95% of the way to the Burson. Okay, excuse me just a second. When this amp is hooked up to the D70, it has a very warm, very liquid, very rich sound to it, even though it's very detailed. So I decided to compare it to the best tube amp I've reviewed so far. That would be the Waveborn Edelweiss 3 Power Amp Plus. It's a transformer coupled tube amp. And it's actually, in my opinion, the best sounding amp I have ever heard. I think it even outdoes the Audio GD Master 9. I think it has a better sound, a little more detail and a little more three-dimensional than even the Master 9. It's an outstanding amp. So anyway, I compared this combo and I used the same DAC hooked up to both. I used the balanced output of the D70 into the Singxer and the single-ended output into the Waveborn tube amp, because that is only a single-ended amp, it's not balanced. So actually the Singxer had a little bit of an advantage receiving the signal from the balanced outputs. So anyway, using the same DAC into both, I have to get it sounds close. It doesn't sound quite as warm and liquid as the tube amp, but it's close. It's, it's somewhere in between what you would normally expect from solid state and the tube amp. The Edelweiss still, it was a little bit warmer, it was a little bit richer. It had a little more detail. That amp just details like crazy. Like I said, it even outdoes a Master 9 as far as detail. And it has, and this is probably because it's a tube amp, it has a little bit more of a three-dimensional sound stage with a little more depth. So I definitely prefer the Waveborn tube amp to the Singxer, but and that's sort of a prototype. I don't think the price is set, but it's probably going to be about twice the price of the Singxer. Plus you have the issues of tubes that, eventually have to be replaced. You've got a lot more heat coming off of it, you need more space, it's bigger, all that stuff. But anyway, but this combo here does have a very tube-like sound. Not quite, but it's pretty close. Anyway, and the Waveborn did do better with the HE560. The Waveborn's rated at 3 watts per channel. It only has single-ended output. but it does drive the HE560 better. The bass has more weight to it, more impact, and it takes the HE560 all the way to its limits, where this amp gets it close but not all the way. Anyway, next I compared this to the Hi-Fi Man EF400, which sells for the same price, $599. Okay, but the EF400 is a DAC and amp combo. I really like the EF400, and I plan to get my full review out on that within the next, hopefully within the next week. I know that's been a long wait too. Okay, first I tried the Singxer with the topping E30 DAC, and when I did that, comparing it to the Hi-Fi Man with its own built-in DAC, and that's the only way you can use it, because the Hi-Fi Man EF400 only has one digital input, that's USB, and it has no analog inputs. So anyway, the Singxer with the E30, I slightly preferred the EF400 over the sound of the Singxer. Okay, but then I switched over to the D70, which warms up the Singxer even more, and then I slightly preferred the sound of the Singxer D70 combination over the Hi-Fi Man, but that combo is twice the price of the Hi-Fi Man. But the big advantage though is you've got 2 sets of analog inputs and you've got 4 digital inputs using that combination, this stack behind me. So it's twice the price, but I actually preferred the sound over the Hi-Fi Man, and I love all the inputs. That's one major issue I have with the EF400. Why did they only put one digital input? Why does it not have coax? Why does it not have optical input? And why does it not have a set of analog inputs on it? You know, so anyway, okay, so then the third thing I tried is the Hi-Fi Man EF400 does have fixed level DAC outputs. You can use it as a DAC into another amp. So I ran balance cables from the XLR outputs of the Hi-Fi Man to the inputs of this amp and ran it off of the built-in DAC from the Hi-Fi Man. So now the Hi-Fi Man amp and the Singxer are both using the same DAC, the built-in R2R DAC from the Hi-Fi Man. Okay, with that setup in that way, I still slightly preferred the Singxer over the Hi-Fi Man. So the conclusion I came to is the built-in R2R DAC in the Hi-Fi Man EF400 is as good as the D70S, which is my favorite DAC under $1,000. But I think that the Singxer amp is slightly better than the built-in amp in the EF400 in that it just seems to have a slightly cleaner sound. And I mean, it's close. It's not a big difference. But I think it just has a slightly cleaner sound where the Hi-Fi Man just has a little bit more grain in the sound. So anyway, so using the built-in R2R DAC, I think that the Singxer amp is actually a little bit better than the Hi-Fi Man, than the amp in the EF400. But the DAC is very, very good in that EF400, and really brought out the best of this amp too. So anyway, and then the last thing I did is I compared this stack here, the Singxer SA-1 with the D70, to the Audio GD Master 9 and R8 MK2 stack, and that's my reference system right now. Okay, I think that they had a very similar sound, very similar tone balance. It sounds very much the same as the Audio GD stack. That said, I think the Audio GD stack in pretty much every way sounds a little bit better. The Audio GD stack it's a little more dynamic, a little more punchy sounding, and it has slightly more detail. I heard slightly not a huge amount, but slightly more detail out of the Audio GD stack than I did from the stack that you see behind me. But I had to use good headphones to hear the difference. With everything up to the Edition XS, I couldn't really hear a difference between the two systems. When I went to the Ananda, I heard a slight advantage from the Audio GD system. When I went to the Aria Stealth, I heard a little bit bigger difference. And when I went to the Kennerton Thror, I heard more difference. And one of the biggest differences was that the Audio GD stack just had more depth to the soundstage, and it was more three-dimensional. And that headphone, the Kennerton Thror, is probably the best headphone I've heard to hear the depth of a soundstage. So how close did it take you? This stack is about, what, $1,250. The Audio GD stack's about $4,200. I would say it probably takes you like 85% of the way there for about a third the price. So, it's not getting you all the way there, and that's what they call the point of diminishing returns. Most people agree in the audio world that you got to spend twice the money to make a 10% improvement. You don't get twice as good for twice the money. You move up like maybe 10%, and that's kind of where you're at here. This system will give you a real similar sound to the Audio GD, but it's not going to take you all the way there. So anyway, that's where I'm at. Do I recommend this? Yeah, I really like this amp. It is a really good amp. The price, $599. There's some other amps out there that are going to give it competition. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to review them. One would be the Topping A90. It sells for $100 less. It has almost perfect specs. I haven't heard it yet, but I've heard that it has sort of a dry analytical sound, which this amp does not. This has a warmer sound. So I can't really tell you. I hope I get a chance to review that sometime. I can't tell you if this is worth the extra $100 or not. Shit Audio sells the Jotunheim, I think, for $200 less than this. It's supposed to have really good power. I don't know if it's as good. I haven't heard it, and I don't know if it has the absolutely dead silent background that this does. That's one of the strong points about this. Even with IEMs, you are going to hear no background noise, even on high gain. So anyway, in my opinion, this is an outstanding amp. And I'm sorry that in my first impressions, I jumped to conclusions a little bit. I hadn't spent much time with it. And I said it didn't do a good job with the HE560 from the single-ended output, but now I'm taking that back and saying it does a pretty decent job. Doesn't take it quite all the way, but it does good, and that's a hard-to-drive headphone. So pretty much every other headphone I tried, including the Aria, the Thror from Kennerton, the Ananda, the single-ended output from this has plenty of power, and the balanced output has enough power for probably any headphone you could throw at this. So really great amp. Seems like a pretty decent price for what you get, and really like it. The only criticism I would give it is the gain controls being on the bottom of the amp, hard to get to. It'd be nicer if they were on the front, or even the back would be easier, but I never had to switch them because I just left it in high gain. Because the amp is so quiet, I had no reason to switch it to low gain to lower the noise floor. So other than that, I can't think of anything any complaints about this amp. The volume knob, you got to get used to that. You got to get used to the fact that with hard-to-drive headphones from the single-ended output, you're going to have to go to like 3 o'clock or even 4 o'clock on the volume knob, which I'm not used to doing. And then the impedance switch, any planar magnetic headphone, you're going to want to leave it on low impedance, especially hi-fi, man. They all sound significantly better with the switch on low impedance. The only headphone I tried that sounded better on high impedance was the ZMF Atrium, and it did definitely sound better on high impedance. So that switch is worth having. I've heard some reviewers don't think it's necessary, but I think it's a good idea. So anyway, yeah, I recommend this amp. I think it's great. I'm going to wrap this up. Gotten way too long. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And you're all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. We're up to over 18.7 thousand members. So hope to see you over there. Once again, thanks for watching my video.